on today's Story Beat.
Just sit down and start writing. It sounds so simple, but it's so profound. That's what you need to do. I don't like writing. I like editing and rewriting. That's where you really love it. And so realize what you throw down is not going to be what's going to be, very unlikely that's going to be what's in the printed version. Let your imagination take over if you're writing fiction. Get down and start writing. Remember, it's not going to be your final piece, and you'll get to love editing and reshaping words, moving things around. That becomes, to me, that's the real love.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on Story Beat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Mike Bodayle, is a semi-retired insurance company executive. His favorite things in life are proudly displayed in the images on the 4 luggage tags found on his suitcase: the Yankees logo, a cassette mixtape, a slice of pizza, and the Starbucks logo. In the mid-1970s, Mike wrote about music for his college newspaper. From 1995 to 2001, Mike published Beyond Belief, an Elvis Costello international fanzine. In 2016, he left printed media for 2 blogs, The Pizza Snob and Music City Mike. In 2025, Mike published A League of His Own, the family memoir he'd long dreamed of writing. I've read A League of His Own and can tell you it's a highly detailed, personal accounting of his family focused largely on his beloved father's adventures with softball, baseball, and life. This led Mike to develop his seminar, How and Why to Write a Memoir, which has returned him to his love of public speaking. Mike's first work of fiction, Music Leads to Murder, is soon to be published. It was inspired by his passion for rock music and his love of murder mysteries, New York City and London. So for all those reasons and many more, I'm delighted to welcome the writer and speaker Mike Bodayle to StoryBeat today. Mike, I'm so glad to have you join me on the show.
Well, thank you, Steve. I'm so honored to be asked and invited to do this. It's going to be great.
Well, the honor is all mine. So let's go back in time just a little bit. When you were a young boy, which came first, thinking about baseball or writing?
Oh gosh, baseball. It was baseball, everything. And I guess that's all we did when we were kids. I mean, in the summer, all the time. You wake up in the morning, played baseball until it got too hot. Then you played baseball games inside where it was cooler. But and if anybody reads the book, I go into great detail of why I gave up baseball at 12. I was, the expression of baseball, the yips, when somebody gets, they'll throw the ball into the stands rather than to the first baseman. I was just too nervous as a baseball player. I had the skills, but I was just so nervous. And I kind of, in the book, tried to talk about where that may have come from. And I don't know exactly where, but eventually got over it, had a decent softball career. But baseball before writing.
Well, if you're going to be a professional ball player, you have to have certain skills and then something beyond, I think.
It's like less than 1% of probably people that make the minor leagues even get to the major leagues. It's that tough, yeah.
It's the pros of almost any sport are ridiculously hard to get to. And if you're good enough to get there, then good on you. But most people cannot. And that's okay, as long as you enjoy the game. So how old were you when you first started to think about words and writing? Were you a reader as a kid?
No, I still am a terrible reader today. It's kind of funny. I don't know that's a really good question, Steve, that I really hadn't thought about when I first started thinking about it. But I just always thought maybe it was from watching TV, and seeing somebody sit down with a typewriter and create. I said, wow, that looks like a pretty neat job to have. I'd like to do that, not have a boss or any responsibilities and just be creative. So, and then when I got to finally writing, I just was always fascinated the fact that you could start with a blank sheet of paper and create something. It just was a remarkable thing to me, and that's how the love sort of developed from just the process of creating something from nothing.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of people, myself included, have long thought about the process of being a writer alone with no boss in a room, to actually be daunting because it's very difficult. In fact, there's a wonderful phrase for it. It's called the tyranny of the blank page or the blank screen, whatever it is, right?
Right. But when am I starting my writing career? When I'm retired and I got my 401k already, right? I didn't have the guts to do it when I was younger. And I had a successful career in business as an accountant. I wanted a paycheck.
Well, that's an important part of life. If you have a need to put a roof over your head and food on the table, then having a job can be very important.
And in my case I just couldn't, what I did with my first paycheck is I bought a stereo system. That's what I wanted to go to work so I could buy a new stereo.
Well, that was your motivation. So you didn't start to really write seriously until after you retired. Is that what you're saying?
Well, and it's funny. I really kind of almost lost track of this. One day, I'm a kind of guy who likes to make lists of things, and I used to be really into trivia. And one day I put together, I think I sat down at a typewriter because that's what I had to do back. This would have been like 74 or something like that.
Tell me about it.
And I put together a whole bunch of music trivia questions, and I brought it to the cafeteria. This was when I was going to Seton Hall University, and all my friends said, "This is pretty cool. Why don't you take it to the school newspaper?" And I brought it up to the school newspaper, and the editor, he said, "Hey, this is pretty cool." He says, "Did you ever try to write something about music?" And I had, and he says, "Well, why don't you try to write something about music?" And I wrote a review for the school newspaper. So that was actually the first thing I ever wrote. I wrote about a dozen or so, stories for, it was called the Sutonian, the Seton Hall newspaper, and I think I put them on my website. If I did, I shouldn't tell anybody because they're terrible. No, I've got scans of them, and I'm glad I didn't put them up there because I was terrible. I was a terrible writer.
So you didn't take writing classes or anything like that? You just started to write?
Never took a writing class. But where my writing skills really developed was as a businessman, as a business writer. I worked for a CPA firm. I worked for one of the big 8 accounting firms, if you know what that means. Mm-hmm. And I used to have to write financial reports, and I just got good at it. And that's something I did most of my career, was write financial reports. And I don't know, just somewhere I just got this love for writing, and I enjoyed it professionally. When my kids, both of my boys were homeschooled by my wife, and I don't know, I just watched her teach him how to write, and I kind of just tagged along and listened, and that's where sort of that love came from, I think.
Most people would think of writing some kind of a report for an accounting firm or for a large agency or whatever to be rather dry and dull and boring. But were you able to make it at least a little interesting? Was that the job?
That's a great question, because you really can't, because you've got these professional boundaries. You can't be creative. Sometimes there's only one way to say something in an accounting report. But you know what it was? I think I just became fascinated with words and constructing words, and never fascinated with punctuation. My wife she hates all my writing because she says my punctuation is so bad. I have no patience with it.
Does she edit for you?
Well, I'm not supposed to say that she does, because she doesn't want, she on League of His Own, she did a good rough edit. But we're kind of leaving a lot of that to Grammarly these days. I don't know if you're aware of Grammarly.
I am aware of Grammarly. Well, so what if you don't think you're a great writer, what compels you to write?
Oh, I didn't say. I think I became a better writer. I don't want to ever say I'm a great writer, but working on, when I started the blog. Well, we're skipping over. I really, the first thing I did after those horrible writings in school was I became a huge fan of Elvis Costello. And, I've seen him several hundred times in concert, and, there was a whole bunch of us, we travel and everything. And I just said, I'm going to do a fanzine. And I'm there. I can remember that day. I'm sitting I'm a chief financial officer of a publicly traded New York Stock Exchange company, right? Literally. And I sit down at my desk one day and I start this fanzine, and I'm saying, it's probably not what I'm supposed to be doing today, but I just couldn't resist it. And I remember creating the title and the logo and everything, and it just took off. And I had a lot of friends help me, and that's where I really honed my writing skills. And we had a good collective where there's like 4 of us where we read each other's stuff. But God, it was, oh gosh, how you had to do it back then. Fax machines, and you couldn't even send a document via email back then.
Well, there's nothing better than passion to make you do something.
It's all about passion, Steve. It's all about passion. And that's what did it. And that fanzine, I didn't lose any money on it. I might have made money, but if I made money, I spent it on records and traveling to go to concerts. God, I had several thousand subscribers all around the world. It was fun.
Did you ever meet Elvis?
Oh yeah, and Elvis read it. He knew about it. We knew each other. He was just a little too snarky about it. He didn't. And but I often said, my reply to that was, if somebody did the Mike Bodayle fanzine, I'd kind of take a step back. Why would somebody want to do this? But we met and talked several times. But he used to read it, and I got feedback from the office sometimes when I maybe stepped over a line. Hey, you should. Those lyrics aren't published yet. Don't print those. Hey, you're right. I won't. I'm sorry I did that. Things like that. But it was a good fanzine, and it's at Music City Mike. I pretty much got those issues out there. People want to read them. It's good stuff. And
so it's all available on Music City Mike.
Yeah, I put it up there for free. I think most of all, I scanned them and put them in there. You can read them. Yeah, and it's really good. It was very well received, very well respected. A lot of people said it was the best music fanzine they ever read, and I really appreciated that. It meant a lot to me.
Do you think of yourself as a people watcher?
No, my observation skills are my worst thing. Talking about, I don't notice a lot of things. I'm not. That's very.
I'm going to disagree with you. I've read your book, and I think you notice a lot of things.
Yeah, I guess I see what you're saying, because I did have a lot of really good memories about all the characters in that book. That's a good point. Maybe I just kind of grew.
Did the book come completely out of your memory, or did you take notes as a kid or something like that?
No. If we get into the book started one day, and this was, I kind of got, well, we can talk about the blogs at some point if you want to, but just to skip over for now, I got burnt out on the blogs. The blogs just started to feel like work. They really did. I don't know why. I was ready for something new.
It's because you're repeating yourself. That's why.
Yeah, exactly. And, I did that. If you looked at the Music City Mike deal, I had this very popular column called 11 Questions to a Nashville Musician. That was very successful. And I got maybe 300-400 interviews of Nashville people. And but then all the PR people started sending to me. I had an inbox of, all these, and I'm like, oh my God, it was a job, It
is a job. This podcast has grown into something like a job. When I did it as a lark in the beginning, I've been doing it for a long time now, and it's become more of an occupation than just a lark.
Yep. And we love jobs that don't make any money, no? Or don't make much money, whatever.
We try to make money, but it is a challenge. There's no question about it, especially in a world where there are so many distractions.
But I got to be honest with you. Writing that first book, League of His Own, I don't think I've done a greater thing in my entire. I think it was the greatest thing, my greatest accomplishment in life. It meant so much to me.
Well, sorry. Tell the listeners what A League of His Own is really all about.
The title tells a lot. And, my dad was a great softball player. He was a really great softball player, and I followed his career. And I grew up in Bayonne, New Jersey, and I like to tell people, to put it in perspective, my bedroom window is 3 miles from the Statue of Liberty. Maybe it's 4 miles, whatever, as the crow flies. And, and like we said, baseball was everything. And like I said, Dad worked, Bayonne was it's a very blue collar town. And I like to say, as I say in the book, in the summer, the guys played softball, and in the winter, they bowled. And then after both, they went to the bar and drank beers. That was their lives, and they loved it. That was very important to everybody. That was how they got their fun. And there used to be in town, in Bayonne, you had Exxon Refinery, Texaco Refinery. My dad worked for Best Foods or corn products. They made Hellman's mayonnaise. And there's Maidenform Bra was in Bayonne. And there was a couple of other chemical companies and refineries. And back in maybe the 40s and 50s, they had an industrial league where those teams, played. And the league fell apart. And in 1968, my dad got the idea of reforming that league. And he formed the league. He was league president. He managed his team, and he was the star player on his team. So A League of His Own, is where the title came from. And, I often thought about, writing something about it, and especially because I thought I had what I call a Hollywood ending. And the book ends with this famous all-star game between the rival league. It was a real Davy and Goliath type thing. My dad's upstart league with the real traditional league. And the game is exciting and has a pretty interesting ending. And I thought my first thought was to fictionalize it. I was going to kind of, dramatize it? And I said, no, I like the story as it is. And then and started with that. And my dad kept a scrapbook, which I've got right here in my desk, of the newspaper clippings, which was very helpful in writing the book. And my dad tried to write, and my dad wanted to be a writer too. Maybe I got some inspiration there, but my dad could not. He was, oh God, his writing is horrible. It's really bad, really, really, really bad.
So your dad was not a celebrity, except perhaps locally. He was not known nationally or even in the state of New York. He was known locally in Bayonne. My question is, what motivated you to want to write more or less his story? I know you got your mom in there too, and your relatives and your grandparents, but what about him made you feel compelled to write a story about him or a book about him?
He had, we talked about passion, and he had a passion for softball. He had a passion for baseball, and I just, the more I thought about it, there were just a lot of interesting stories that that sort of, I talk about this book. It's, it started with that Hollywood ending thing, and then about the league, but then there was all these building blocks, to show Dad's development. And you'll see in the book, I contrast it with my 5 years of Little League. You read that, and I thought that was nice, and threw a couple of stories, and I even threw a couple of things in there that people say, well, I'm really surprised that wasn't very flattering for your dad. And I said, no, it wasn't, but it was true. And, and he learned from some of the mistakes he made in life as a father, and he was a great father, but we all make mistakes. Dad had a temper, and just told some things that maybe weren't so flattering.
Did you find it difficult to write those unflattering things?
No, I didn't, because I think they were all really strong character lessons for him. And he never made he didn't make repeat his flaw. When he did something that wasn't right, he didn't repeat it. He learned from it. Like I learned a lot of things like that as a father too. That wasn't the right thing to do, and I'll never do that again.
So do you think that your years of working in a disciplined field, that being a CFO of a major insurance company, which I have to imagine is a fairly buttoned down job, that you have a lot of responsibility, do you think that your discipline in that job helped you to sit down and then write in a disciplined manner?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm a very disciplined, organized guy. Yeah, I mean, organization. My organization makes people sick. And that's the way I am. And then also the passion. Overtook it. A famous line heard around this house was, "Do we have to talk about your book today?"
How long did it take you to write it?
That's something I really didn't keep track of. I wrote it 10 years ago. I started it and left it, and for no good reason. And I'd say when I really put the commitment in to get it done, maybe it took 9 months, 10 months, something like that. And one thing I want to say, one thing that was really important, and I just thank God for this. I did sit down and interview Dad for about 2 hours before he passed. Now, and sadly, Dad passed before the book ever came out. He never got to see it. But I did get a 2-hour interview that really helped. And just to backtrack a little bit, I said Dad was a bad writer. Well, I have all his writings, and in the book, as you know, I probably had 6 or 7, Dad reflects that were things in Dad's handwriting. I put them in italics to make them look different format-wise. But I obviously had to do a lot of editing on it. But the spirit and facts are there, and they're great stories. Growing up during the Depression, how he found baseball, and all those kind of things were really good to have.
So the book is pretty much in chronological order of life. It doesn't bounce around too much, or if at all.
A little. No, I think there's a little bit. And that's it's funny you say that, because I did a little research on memoirs, and one of the things that people said is it shouldn't be, worst thing you could be is chronological. I was born, but I had an introduction and an epilogue. It kind of, but it is a little bit chronological, but not completely.
Well, there are some memoirs and biographies and books of that kind that literally bounce back and forth, back and forth, back and forth throughout the whole book. Your book is more or less a straight line with some sidebars to the past. And that was a decision. Did you make that relatively early on, or did you wait till you completed a draft before you decided that?
I just kind of wrote as I thought of things, and when I got to the end, I I moved only a couple of chapters around, so I didn't change it much, and I had some very respected people read it, and one of is a friend of mine who is a television writer. He told me I should move one chapter, and I decided not to. And in my How to Write a Memoir thing, I refer to that and I say, listen to people, but remember something. It's your book.
It's definitely your book. And that is a very, very important point, because lots of people, if you give it to enough people, you're going to get lots of different opinions.
Exactly.
And those opinions can be extremely valuable, and at the same time, they can be very confusing. So it's still your book, and you need to write what, you feel in your heart of hearts works. And that's the way it is. And that's for better or worse. It comes out. And if people think the book stinks, it's on you. If they think it's brilliant, it's on you. So that's the way that works.
I'm working on this novel now. I'm working on a novel now, and my wife's read half of it so far. And she's telling me, you just got to do this. And I'm saying, I'm not going to do that. And she keeps, every time we bring her the book, she goes, but you're not going to do that? And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I just thought I had too much scenery in one chapter. And I said, well, that's the purpose of that chapter, is to set the scenery. No, spread it around. I said, no, I don't want to spread it.
I'll tell you what, if you have the good fortune at some point to complete the book and get it into the hands of a really good editor, they may suggest similar things. Then you really have a dilemma. You've got to decide, do I want to make those changes?
Well, you just brought up that whole world. I mean, do you know how many memoirs go to publishers?
Well, I'm sure it's tens of thousands.
No, but of the ones that are available, it's less than 1%. It's really hard to get, a memoir like this to a real publisher.
Oh, a memoir like what A League of His Own would be very hard to get published.
Yeah, and I'm even, it's been successful. People love it, and that's one thing that I've kind of been looking into. And I can't even find a publisher, who it meets their criteria for type of books they're looking for.
The market is saturated. And with the world of self-publishing, it's even more saturated than ever. And so it's very difficult to get people's attention, let alone get them to invest money in you and your work. They have to see some way to make money back, because at the end of the day, you as a CFO know it really, at the end of the day, is all about making money. It's not about how wonderful you are.
Well, and for me, it was just getting this out there. I want the book. I want people to read the book because I like the book. It's a good book. It's a great story. And I have not had a single person yet tell me they didn't like the book. And when somebody tells you they like it, there's a way to tell if they're patronizing you, and no one's patronizing. And it's like when they start quoting from the book and they start asking you to go deeper into a story. No, they liked the book. I really believe they liked it.
So tell us about what kind of research you did beyond the scrapbook that your father had. Did you do any kind of research going back into the way Bayonne was in its day and those people?
No, that was just really observation. I think the only research I recall doing was for the chapter I wrote on the history of softball, which I kind of kick off the book with.
Right.
Just to kind of put that in perspective. But most of that stuff is just all from memory.
Do you think your memories were in any way skewed by time?
No, I really don't think so. Well, I don't think Steve, I don't think I got too into the weeds on anything where, I couldn't, that might have been an issue. At least that's the way I saw it.
Well, the reason why I ask, and I'm sure that you're right, but the reason why I ask is you have vivid depictions of many different people from these various leagues and the people your dad worked with and your family and your friends and so on. And so this is all out of your memory, not from any kind of journaling.
Well, in the book, I really chronicle the one season, which is the inaugural season of the Bayonne Industrial League. And, and from the beginning to end, well, I was the bat boy. I was how old? I guess I was 12. And, I was the bat boy. I knew all the players. I was there every week, and I lived and breathed it. And also having that scrapbook one thing I talk about in the book, in Bayonne, New Jersey, one of these softball games, it was in the newspaper the next day with pictures, box scores. My dad would write the story, it was big news. And so reading those scrapbooks brought back a lot of memories. And I just remember, I can go back, close my eyes now and just take myself back to that field and see those guys, and the way they were dressed and all that.
So you have a very good memory. You've got It's very vivid too, because you paint pictures that give the reader a vivid understanding of what it is we're looking at or reading, and I think that's not common. I don't think everybody has that kind of memory. So you're very fortunate.
No, that's what a lot of people said. Now, and that's what I'm trying to do with this novel that I'm writing now. You mentioned my luggage tags. We'll switch to the music one right now. I mean, music is, you can see the records behind me in the picture there, but music's very important to me. And I grew up in the late '70s, and would go into New York, three or four times a week to go hear live music, and that was so important to me. And when I wrote this book, which is a murder mystery set in 1978 in the New York City music scene, I wanted to make you live and feel what it was like then. And I wanted, I wanted my memories. Like I used to go to this club called The Bottom Line all the time. Been there hundreds of times. And I wanted to write somewhere what it was like inside that club, which is now torn down, what it was like to buy. How did you buy the tickets? What was the food like? What was on the menu? What was the sound like? And I really wanted to get that all in the book. So, very similar to the kind of thing showing about League of His Own. I had a field day with, describing that club and a lot of other things in Greenwich Village during those days.
But that's based on fiction. That's not a real story.
Well, it's historical. It's historical fiction. Like our friend Barry Greenfield's book, All You Needed Courage, where he puts himself. I'm inserting fictional characters into the real setting in that novel.
We should tell the listeners that you and Barry Greenfield are very good friends. Barry's been on this show twice. This is your first time, obviously. And so it's clear that you have an affinity for a similar kind of storytelling.
Well, and I got to give credit to somebody. There is a book that came out in the 90s by a guy named Louis Shiner, Shiner, and it was called Glimpses. And it's a great book. And that's what got me into this. Barry and I had Barry read it, and we talked about it, like this whole concept of historical fiction. Like in this book, this guy interacts in his dreams with Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, Jim Morrison of the Doors, and the Beatles, and Jimi Hendrix. And I just love that whole idea. So that's the book that I'm working on now. The tentative title is called Music Leads to Murder. It's all real places and real people, but just with the fictional characters interacting with those real people.
Got it. So that is sometimes called a roman à clef. That's sometimes what people will refer to those kinds of books as, because you're fictionalizing reality, or historical fiction is a very good way to say it as well. So let's go back to A League of His Own for a moment, because I have a number of questions I want to ask you. Tell us some of the ways and philosophies your dad lived by that have influenced you, especially as a storyteller.
Well, it's hard to talk about the influences on my dad's life without talking about, that he lived through the Great Depression. That was just such a traumatic experience, and I think it's something you never get over. You just never get over it. And Dad was very careful with money. He wasn't cheap, but he was smart with his money, wasn't foolish with it, and was determined to work hard and to save and buy a home and take care of his family, and he did all of that.
Do you think that eventually influenced you to become an accountant?
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. Well, Dad was good with math, and we both were good with math and had a love of math. And I used to go to work with him on the weekends when he worked overtime, and I would play with the calculators and do all my baseball statistics and things like that. So I think that love of baseball and the statistical end of baseball definitely was probably an influence for being an accountant. Keeping won-loss records and batting averages and ERA and all that kind of stuff. I think that definitely.
The ERA, it's a percentage. It's a
tricky one too.
Yes,
it's a tricky one. You had to get it to on a basis of 9, right? Remember?
Yes.
Based on 9 innings. So yeah.
It is tricky. And so as a kid, if you learn that, you're already learning math, but you don't know it.
That's right. It's so funny. You think of baseball and a guy's batting .312, and you don't really think that that's 31 means 31% of the time, right?
Right.
So if he gets a hit 31% of the time, he's great. If he gets a hit 24% of the time, which doesn't sound like much at all, he's not so great.
It is amazing.
It is amazing.
And they're not getting anywhere usually at least 1 out of 3 times or more.
And I'm sure you've seen Bull Durham, right?
Yes, of course.
There's that scene on the bus where Kevin Costner talks about, like, if you got one bloop hit a week extra, where, you know, he talked about how your average could go up just by luck.
I think I said a moment ago, I said it's actually you're not getting on base or you're not getting anywhere 2 out of 3 times. 2/3 of the time, you're not doing anything helpful to the team.
Exactly.
I mean, that seems like you would be fired from that job.
And my favorite line about baseball is, you know, you can't win every game, but you sure want to.
Oh, yeah, I would.
And if you win 2 out of 3, you're going to the World Series.
That's correct. That's absolutely right. So tell the listeners about the Italian restaurant San Vito. Why was it important to your story?
Oh gosh, you know, you would have thought we were Italian the way we grew up. Well, I think I mentioned in the book, a lot of times on Thanksgiving or Christmas, we'd have, instead of ham or turkey, we'd have lasagna. My mother made such a good lasagna. But we, you know, and in Bayonne, you were either Italian, Irish, Polish, or Jewish. And the ethnicity, the Italian ethnicity was, it's so based in food. And we had so many great Italian restaurants. And we just fell in love with this one restaurant, San Vito. It's still there. And, you know, I talk about it. There's a chapter in the book. Well, it's a good section in the book about my dad's relationship with the owner of the restaurant, who was an Italian immigrant. They were just best buds, and they had nothing in common, you know, but they just got along and loved talking to each other and laughing, making each other laugh and happy. And we'd just go there and eat great pizza, great real Parmesan, chicken Parmesan.
Was this your introduction to pizza and start your love of it?
I mean, I think when I was, well, actually introduction to pizza, and I think it's in the book too, you know, in Bayonne, there's a tavern on every corner. Mm-hmm. Literally, that's not an exaggeration. And every one of those taverns makes pizza, and they make good pizza. Some of the best pizza you get in New Jersey still today is in a bar. You know, they call them bar pies. So we would just, my mom would send me down. You know, we're going to watch a TV show. She'd give me $1 to go buy a pizza. A large pie was $1.25, and a regular pie was $1. You know, so. And I'd get the pizza, and we'd have the pizza while we watched television.
Not anymore, I bet.
Not anymore.
Tell the listeners what the distinction is, what the differences are between softball and baseball.
And it's very interesting, too. In the book, I actually found out how the guy invented softball. And it was just kind of really to kind of dumb the game down a little bit, you know, that people who maybe didn't have great baseball skills could still play it and enjoy it, but then it somehow morphed into a more advanced game for people maybe who were a little older. You know, as you got older, your reflexes aren't as good. You can't run the bases fast, but you know, you're playing with a larger ball, and you're pitching underhand. There's no no stealing bases, that kind of thing. And you know, it's just meant to be a little gentler form of a game. And
the ball is bigger, so it's easier to hit than a baseball, unless you're being pitched to by Eddie Feigner, who we'll talk about in a moment. It's coming in a little slower than a baseball would, so it's a little gentler game. That's what I think.
A little gentler game, but you know, the level that they played at it in League of His Own was a pretty highly competitive.
Oh, I imagine
it was competitive baseball, softball, but you know that it's sort of still, but you know when you get to be age 40 to hit a 90-mile-an-hour baseball fastball, forget, you're not going to do it. I mean,
you don't have the reflexes for it.
You don't have the reflexes, so you've dumbed it down a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Is that the major difference? Is just that it's a bigger ball and slower, or is the field different?
Well, the mound's shorter, I think, and the bases are a little shorter.
Shorter.
Yeah.
So all of it is just a little more or a little less challenging than a true baseball field would be. So I just mentioned Eddie Feigner. I knew who Eddie Feigner was when I was a kid. Tell the listeners, who I bet very few would know who Eddie Feigner was, what about Eddie and he was known as the king in his court? Tell the listeners about him.
Well, he was just an amazing softball pitcher. He was close to unhittable. He could throw a softball that fast underhand. And he played with it was a pitcher, catcher, and I think he had one fielder or two fielders. I can't remember whether it was one or two.
So he really didn't need many people because nobody could hit him.
Nobody could hit him. And that was his shtick. And he would, he basically toured as a like, you know, like much like the Harlem Globetrotters, you know, go on tour, and he would go on tour and, you know, and earn his living that way. And in the book, it also gave me a chance. I loved any time I could reminisce about something, you know, from childhood that people don't know what they're talking about. But did you remember Wide World of Sports?
Oh, of course.
That's where I saw him. I didn't see him in person. My dad did, and but I remember seeing him on Wide World of Sports. You know, because Wide World of Sports was just, you know, they just had all these sports oddity. You know, they would have the Muhammad Ali fights or Cassius Clay fights and stuff, you know, on tape a week later, that kind of thing. But there was always, you know, these odd sports, you know, badminton, or I don't know what they would have. But the interesting story is that, you know, and this is so remarkable. And I tried to reach out to this fellow, but there's a guy named Rich Hoppy, and who's from Bayonne, New Jersey. And when he was a kid, he saw Eddie Feigner pitch and wanted to do the same thing. And I saw Rich Hoppy pitch a lot, and he was an incredibly fast softball pitcher. And the miracle, the oddity is that when Eddie Feigner retired, Rich Hoppy took over his position in King's Court. And I think he was actually the king longer than Eddie Feigner was.
So for the listeners who don't really know what we're talking about, in softball, you pitch underhand. You don't throw overhand like a professional baseball player does. You pitch underhand. And he could whip a ball behind him and whip it through, and nobody could hit him. It was crazy to watch.
Now, in my dad's league, they called his a modified slow pitch. Now, I don't know what softball's like in Pittsburgh, but there's some really bad softball games where they do the arc pitch, and, you know, they have slow pitch and let him hit it. And what they had in my dad's league, it's called modified slow pitch. It was a competitive pitching. I mean, you couldn't throw sidearm, and you couldn't do a windmill, you couldn't whip, but you can throw underhand as fast as you can. And so there was an art to pitching. You know, where you can, you know, go for corners, you know, throw a change up, you know, slow pitch, try to fool the guy, that kind of stuff.
It's much harder to do than it sounds like.
Oh, it's very hard. But at least it wasn't like a silly game. Well, and, you know, and I'm sure people, I mean, women's softball is huge now, and I'm sure most of your listeners probably have seen the women's softball, and that's what they're throwing, but it's a little faster than what we had.
Oh, the women's softball is brutal. That's take no prisoners. That's really hard stuff. What is the difference then between a good pickup game and an organized league game? What's the distinction between the two? Just practice, or the players are better? What's the difference?
Well, I mean, the players were serious. I mean, you know, I go through each of the players on my dad's team, and there were some really great baseball players. And there was one guy on the team. His name was Vinny Caravella. My dad, I mean, he was just the most incredible baseball player I've ever seen. He played shortstop. I think his batting average was maybe 670 or something crazy like that. You know, and he was lightning fast, and he was such a great fielder. My dad actually got him a tryout with the Mets. I talk about that in the book, and it was a great story. He was too old. I think he was 26 at the time, and he lied and said he was 24. And, you know, that's too old to start a baseball career. But I mean, that was really Vinny was a great guy, and I think it was really a thrill for him to get that tryout. But he was just, as a shortstop, I mean, you're talking about somebody playing shortstop in a softball game, diving for balls. You know, and can you imagine diving on, landing on dirt?
On dirt, yeah.
I'd be in the hospital.
You and me both. Your dad, in doing the leagues and in organizing things, turns out he was a really good arbiter. He comes off in the book as if perhaps he could have been a really good lawyer. I mean, that's the feeling that one gets when you're reading the book, that he was good at arbitrating things, arbitrating arguments, and pulling people together. How important do you think that your dad was in terms of having you become a good arbiter?
Well, yeah, I mean, my wife says I get more like my dad every day, and I think she's right. And yeah, I did see that dad, you know, I think both dad and I I think I mentioned this in the book, but one of my friends at work used to call me Switzerland.
Yes, you're neutral.
And, you know, I can remember working in companies where you had one company I worked at, the president and the CEO just hated each other and wouldn't talk to one another. They would talk to each other through me.
How did they function? How did the company function?
No, they did. It didn't last very long. but you know, And I think I got that from Dad. I think both Dad and I could get along with just about anybody.
He was a neutral guy.
He was a neutral guy too, yeah. But I think to a point, sometimes Dad avoided well, we both. I do too. Neither one of us like confrontation.
You're conflict averse.
Conflict adverse, yeah. And there's a couple of neighborhood stories in the book, about some of those things where Dad, just kind of looked, couldn't deal with reality of a neighbor taking advantage of him, that kind of thing.
So your mom, we'll talk about her for a moment. She was, as you write in the book, you have a whole chapter on it. She was a worrier, and and you're a little bit of a worrier. That's an inherited trait, yeah.
Yes, sir. Worrying is thinking about the future and assuming the worst possible event. Like whatever you think, it's like the worst possible thing's going to happen.
I call that perseverating.
Yeah.
Because I am a bit of a worrier myself, and so I get it.
And the worst thing is the things you can't control. When it's something beyond your control, it drives you nuts.
Well, that is pretty much everything except a little teeny slice of life. Everything else is outside of your control, but you worry about it anyway. Do you think there are advantages to being a worrier? Are there advantages in business or in life?
Well, you just made me think, is it a good question? Is it a byproduct of being very passionate? It could be.
I think it is.
It's a byproduct of being passionate. You want it to succeed, and you want to succeed, and you're just impatient.
It means you care. The question is whether you take it to a point where it becomes a problem for you, where it gets in your way.
What? Yeah, that's the thing you need to avoid, is because it can make you unproductive. Because sometimes I've worried about things, and I've gotten a lot better over the years. Where you just wake up and you're kind of depressed, and you don't want to do anything. And you hyper focus on something, and really you just need to be patient and wait, because it's just, sometimes there's just nothing you can do but wait.
Many things will blow over with just a little patience.
We really haven't talked about the world of self-publishing much, but the world of self-publishing has a lot of benefits, but it has a lot of challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're dealing with robots and AI and computers, and you're not dealing with people. Well, this is the second time this has happened to me now. One of the benefits they say of self-publishing is, you can make a correction to your book because it's only printed. And I discovered Grammarly, and I went back and ran Grammarly on League of His Own, on the copy you read, and I found some typos. So I corrected them. And I'm real happy that I did it. Some of them I couldn't believe that they were in there. And that's a whole other story. But so and I did this once before. I changed one word or something one time. So, and both times I've done it, my publisher, you got to submit the whole. There's four pieces to your self-publishing upload: the interior, the cover, and then you got the same for the ebook, and the ebook cover. So you got these four things you got to upload, and each time if you change, all I did was change the text, didn't change the number of pages. You got to upload all four things again. Well, both times I did that, they rejected my cover. They said it doesn't meet specifications.
Same cover.
Same cover. I didn't change it. And here's the funny part of it. The message I get is that your cover doesn't bleed to the edges. If this is printed, you will have a white border around the cover and the spine. That's my design, to have a white border around the cover. So right now you can't buy my book, and I'm waiting for customer service to reply, and they are slow.
That's the nature of where we are today.
The computer kicks it out, but I just need to get a person to go in there and say, oh, I understand what you're saying, like they did last time. But for the last 10 days, you can't buy my book. So it drives me crazy. And I said, where we talked about worrying about something you can't control, right?
But if you are passionate about it and you care about it, you're going to make it work or be right as quickly as you can within whatever the system is. So it required a little bit of worry. But what happens to people that are worriers is sometimes you go way beyond the need.
And not check the email every 30 seconds to see if they're going to write you back,
Tell the story of the contribution your dad made to the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Oh, God. And that's just, the coincidence behind that is just so crazy. My dad, he saved his vacation time to watch the World Series on TV. And as a passionate Yankee fan, in the early 60s, that was just, the Yankees were there every year. So late 50s, early 60s.
I will not apologize for 1960.
Oh, Bill Mazeroski. Can we do that? Let's do a little sidebar on that before I forget. But did you ever watch the Baseball Hall of Fame deal about that?
No.
You've got to watch it. What Steve was talking about, Bill Mazeroski hit a game-winning home run in the Game 7, bottom of the 7th inning to win. But did you know in the bottom of the 8th, some other guy hit a home run to give the Pirates the lead?
I thought Mazeroski hit it in the bottom of the 9th.
Well, he didn't. No, but in the bottom, the Yankees are winning, and in the bottom of the 8th, this other guy in the Pirates hit a home run to give them the lead. Well, the Yankees took the lead again in the top of the 9th. So if the Yankees didn't do that, they were teasing this other guy. You would have been on the cover of Sports Illustrated, not Bill Mazeroski. So had the Yankees not taken the lead in the 9th, Bill Mazeroski wouldn't have been the hero. This other guy, well, I can't even remember his name.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
But anyway, we digress. But so what my dad started doing was he had an old reel-to-reel tape recorder, and he taped the audio of the World Series games off of the radio. You got a better play-by-play on the radio rather than the TV. And he built up this nice collection. Well, he had a friend. I mentioned the friend who was the baseball scout, the same guy that gave Vinny the tryout with the Mets. He was a Yankee scout at the time. And he knew of my dad's tape collection, and he said, hey, Whitey Ford would love a copy of the tapes, because Whitey Ford has the World Series record. He pitched 33 2/3 consecutive scoreless innings in the World Series. So my dad made Whitey Ford a set of those tapes, and then I got taken to Yankee Stadium. We went to give the tapes to Whitey Ford. My first time at Yankee Stadium, and I like to say about that is, me and Billy, I steal this comment from Billy Crystal. He made me realize that the first time he ever saw a baseball game in color was when he went to Yankee Stadium. And that was the same thing for me, because it was all the black and white TV. So I know that, well, I'm kind of getting the long way to the story, but so we gave Whitey Ford the tapes over the railing before the game. And, Whitey Ford, Hall of Famer. And he said, is there anything I could do for you? To my dad. And he said, can you take my son to meet Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris? So he took me down to the clubhouse, and I got to meet my two heroes. And I grew up Mickey, so to see Mickey Mantle, and we go to, as you know in the book, I go through the full detail on that. But strangely enough, I used to read USA Today newspaper at my lunch every day. When I used to go to lunch by myself and read the paper, and I read this story about this guy who collected World Series tapes just like my dad, and he was looking for 7th game of the 1952 World Series, and I thought, of course my dad's got that. So I somehow, I don't know how I got in touch with the guy back in those days. I somehow found his phone number, and I called him, and he couldn't believe it, and he got the tape, and this guy donated his collection to the Baseball Hall of Fame. So my dad's tape got in the Baseball Hall of Fame. He was real excited about that.
Wow, isn't that cool? Did he get to go to the Hall of Fame and see it there?
No, he never got to, but we had went when I was a kid, and we went time, but he never got back to go. So, but that's kind of neat and special that that chance reading that story in the newspaper led to that.
So I'm interested, you write in the book that writing about your family, and this is a quote, I'm quoting, writing about your family can be a source of constant regret. Why? Explain.
Because all the things you didn't ask them about. Because I kept coming up with questions. Why didn't I ask more questions? And they're not around. I talk about my dad. My dad spent a couple of years in Korea in the Army just before the war, and all I never heard about was baseball, and that's where he learned how to drive. He played softball in Korea, and he learned how to drive a car there. Why didn't I ask him more about that? Why didn't I do that? I just kept thinking of things I should have asked Mom and I should have asked Dad that I wanted to know.
Well, what do you think the reason is you didn't?
I don't know. I just don't know. Life moves so fast, I guess. And I guess my wife talks about, she come up with this great term. She should be a writer. She'd be a great writer. But, we were talking about how there's a period in your life, probably from about age 25 to 35, that you kind of don't pay as much attention to your parents because you're busy with your career. My wife goes, yep, you're launching. And I just think about those launching years. I just, and I miss my brother growing up, because my brother's like 9 years younger than me, because I was launching and didn't talk to Dad. And then finally, I really, in the later years, we really got, I lived in Nashville and I lived in Texas, and they were in New Jersey, but we did spend a lot of good quality time together. But still, I kept thinking about things I really would have wanted to learn more about that went on in their lives.
And that's your regret.
That's my regret, yeah.
So let's talk about your seminars for a moment. What is your motivation for doing seminars?
I love public speaking. and I did a lot of teaching. I taught CPA review class and taught when I was with the big 8 accounting firm. I taught a lot, and I like getting in front of people and doing it. I'm always the guy at the funeral. I give the eulogies. I did it for my wife's parents. I did it for my mom. I didn't get to do it for my dad, and I'm always the guy at the family. They say, "Get up and say something, Mike," and I just like it. I wanted to promote this book because I want people to read it. And I've donated most of the proceeds that I've made from this book to Alzheimer's, which Dad died of. But I said, I just don't want to be out there hawking a book, And I said, what can I make it into? So I made a presentation called How and Why to Write a Memoir. And I've only done it once so far. I did it a couple of weeks ago. It took a while to prepare and get people on people's calendar. But I'm a member of the Rotary Club here in Franklin. And I did it at the Rotary Club, and people loved it. They really did. And my point was just to encourage you to do it, how much you'll enjoy it, how you're going to disappear someday, and these memories are going to go with you. They're going to, you need to get these down for the posterity, and you'll really enjoy doing it. It brings your family back to life. And just really try to encourage them to do it, give them a lot of the do's and the don'ts, and kind of incorporate it with what I did and tell them a little about the book along the way. And I've got two, maybe three more scheduled up later in the year. So I'm looking forward to that.
You enjoy it then. That's the whole point.
It was really fun, and people really enjoyed it. Come up and they bought some books. I signed some books. I am learning something. People don't read anymore.
What? I had no idea.
Well, a lot of the people I'm associated with, they don't read anymore. I get people that have bought this book and it's on the nightstand. I'll get to it, And I think the internet and telephone thing, I think people's reading habits are not as good as they used to be.
It's become it's amazing. There are more books sold than ever before in history, and fewer and fewer people are reading. It's strange. I mean, you'd think it'd go the other way. You'd think that with nobody reading, that there'd be less and less books, but there are more and more books being sold. So it's a bit of a mystery. So what is Music City Mike?
Well, I just wanted to write about music, and that's what that website was.
All genres, specific genres,
pretty much stuff I like.
Which is
stuff
what?
I like.
Which is
I like rock music. I grew up a country rock kid. Became a big Springsteen fan when I lived in Jersey. Big Costello fan. I like power pop, and if you know what power pop is, I'm a big power pop fan. Just a lot of different things, and so I kind of made it an amalgamation of things. I would write reviews of concerts that I went to in Nashville or when I traveled. Wrote about classic concerts, concerts that I went to, back in the 70s and 80s. Did the little thing called 11 Questions to Nashville Musicians, and just kind of things that I've written. Now, something I might do. I was on vacation. I like to write on vacation, and we were in Costa Rica for a couple of weeks, and I put together the best of Music City Mike as if it were a book, and I might publish that at some point. Yeah, it's there. It just needs to be formatted and all that good stuff, and get a cover and deal with all the self-publishing. So,
well, I was going to say at this point how to self-publish.
Yeah, no border, no white border on the cover.
No, that's correct. It's got to bleed all the way out.
Right.
And it's something you're ongoing with. You keep plugging articles in there.
No, I stopped both blogs for a while. They're on sabbatical. I say they're on sabbatical.
They're on sabbatical.
Yeah.
But they're still available for people to find. Both.
Oh yeah, and I told my son, please just when I leave this planet, just keep paying them, keep paying so the stuff stays out there.
Do you have a loyal following?
I did. I mean, both that and the Pizza Snob, I had a lot of, the number of hits were good. I was very pleased with it. I mean, obviously it's slowed down when you don't have new stuff, but I still get comments and stuff, and you're a jerk. It's a great pizza place.
What's your favorite pizza place in the world?
Well, have you been to Manhattan?
I have been to Manhattan, but I haven't eaten too much pizza there.
Oh, Joe's Pizza in Manhattan is the classic textbook best New York slice.
Is that a chain or is that one place?
It was one place, but they have 4 locations in Manhattan now.
Yeah, in Manhattan.
Now I'll tell you, I've eaten pizza in Pittsburgh. What's it begins with an M?
Minio's.
Minio's is great, and it's a great record store 2 doors down.
Jerry's Records.
Jerry, I love. Oh, that's my son. My connection with Pittsburgh is, I think I told you earlier before we started. our son got his master's from Duquesne. So we would go there, and my wife would drop me off at Jerry's and Mineo, and I'd go to Mineo's. I loved it over there. Mineo's. We have one in Nashville. That's Mineo's. It's Mineo's, yeah.
Anybody that I know that grew up on Mineo's pizza, it's their favorite pizza. But as I understand it, and you're the pizza snob, so you'll tell me, isn't it true that pretty much anybody that grew up on a pizza from a place, they will tell you that's the best pizza ever?
Oh, yeah. I think so too. And don't get me started on New York and Chicago. I like Chicago style pizza. I love it, but it's different. It's a different food. Don't compare. You shouldn't compare them.
It's deep dish. It's thicker.
It's like a quiche, and it's good. I love it. Don't get me wrong, but it's just no need to compare it. But I like good, thin, crispy New York crust.
You like a thin, crispy crust.
Yep, and cheese only. I don't want anything on my pizza.
Just cheese.
Just cheese.
That's interesting. Bread, sauce, and cheese.
Bread, sauce, and cheese.
Well, I've been having a really fun conversation with Mike Bodayle, and we're going to wind the show down just a little bit. And you've told us a lot of really great, funny stories here already, but I'm wondering if you can share with us a story through all your experiences that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or just plain funny.
I was working in my office in Nashville, and I stayed late one day, and it was about 6 o'clock. And it was the day I launched the Pizza Snob blog. So I said, I'm ready. I'm going to put this out there right now. So I stayed between 5 and 6. I used to do that a lot to not to drive in traffic. I had my logo designed. I had, the whole layout on I use WordPress. And I had the first story I was going to publish and hit the button and sent it, right? And for some reason, I brought my lunch that day, and I can't remember why I did. And my lunch was a little red thermal bag. You know what I'm talking, like a little thermal thing,
sure.
A very short little thermal bag. And so I carried that in my briefcase, and I walked out, and our office is literally right next to a movie theater. And I walked out the door, and as I walked out, right in front of me was a little boy and his parents going to the movies. And the little boy saw me in that red thing, and he said, "Mommy, look, it's the pizza man."
Wow.
Because you know how they would deliver a pizza with a red...
Yes.
You've seen him with that red, insulated thing. And this thing was tiny, but I mean, the coincidence of that, Steve, come on.
That's weird. That's the universe saying something to you.
And then, so last weekend, I went to Houston to see the Yankees. Every year I go to an away series, and I went to see the Yankees play 3 games with the Astros. And going to an away baseball game as a Yankee fan is really great. Because you stay downtown, you stay at the hotel, and Yankee fans are just like everywhere. All you do is talk baseball for the whole weekend, So I went into a coffee shop right next to my hotel, and I met a young guy who came down from New York to see the game. He was much younger than me, and he was meeting his dad there because he was from Texas. And we started talking about baseball and how we got into baseball, and it led to talking about my book. And he seemed very interested, and I told him all the stories about my dad. And it kind of put Dad in my brain. And I hadn't been thinking about Dad for a while. And I just started thinking about Dad. Oh, I'm at a Yankee game. I wish Dad was here. I wish we could, my dad doesn't even know who Aaron Judge is, that kind of thing. So Dad's on my brain. And I'm walking back to my hotel. And I walk past a man. And he was with a walker. And I'm not sure if he was homeless, handicapped, or both. I couldn't really tell. And he had an Astros jersey on. And he's saying, "Sir." And I just kept walking. And I have a real heart for people, in need like that. But, and I confirmed this later, but if the cities tell you not to support the panhandlers because there's programs for them. They don't want them to get dependent on that. So I respect that. But so I kept walking away, and he kept going, "Sir, no, sir, please. I need to talk to you. Okay. Something brought me back. So I go back to him, and he spoke very articulately. I was so impressed. And he said, "Sir," he said, "I look at your face. You are a man of character. You just look like to be such a strong man of character." He said, "Are your parents still alive?" And I said, "No." He said, "I can just tell by looking at your face, you had a great, wonderful father, didn't you?" I was just floored, because walking back with just Dad on my heart for somebody to come up to me, like again, the universe talking to me again. It was just... It wasn't funny, but it was certainly unusual.
It's a thing that some people would call synchronicity.
Yeah.
And it just, the universe that energy is right there at that moment.
A kiss from God, it's whatever.
Did it weird you out at all?
No, it got me. I don't know. It just kind of inspired me. It really did. It really did. But I mean, both of those really inspired me that I was doing the right thing both times. And I think that's we look for that in life, and to get it in a strange way even really makes it more special, doesn't it?
Yes, I think it does. It's a little tap on the shoulder that says you're doing the right things.
Yep, and I took it that way.
Very nice. So last question for you today, Mike. You've shared with us a huge amount of information that's very helpful to people throughout this entire show. I'm just wondering, do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip that you can lend to us that's either, useful to anyone that's starting out to learn how to write, or maybe they're in a little bit trying to get to that next level where they can get published?
One of the frustrating things about being a passionate writer is that, we strive for perfection. You don't want to have any typos or mistakes in the book. And when you write 250 pages, and that's 80,000 words, man, that's hard. That's a real challenge. And, I don't care how many times you read the book, the more you read it, the harder it gets to notice things. So you get so used to it, you read it quicker. And you're going to let other people read it. Sometimes they'll find things, sometimes they won't, because they'll read it quick too, and they'll read it in bits and pieces, rather than reading it all the way through. And I've learned something. I grew up, I use Microsoft Word, which is a great software, and it's got the spell check and it's got the grammar check. But when you put a document with 80,000 words, it's not totally effective. I'm warning you. And I beat that to death and had a perfect 100 score on it. And there were still typos in there. And that's where I discovered this Grammarly software. It's amazing. It really is amazing. And it just found, and there's different levels of Grammarly, and it can take you into the AI world. You don't want to do that. You don't want to change your writing. You're not there to change your writing style. There's like different sections, and all I did was what's called punctuation. And it tells you all your commas, and I learned how to use who versus whom, and, better than I was using it. And, it found typos, misspellings. It's a really neat little tool to run through your book.
Well, the part of the problem, certainly not all of it, is that there are many words that sound similar that are spelled differently, and a spell checker won't pick those up at all.
Right, exactly. So I really, and it's free, and Grammarly is free, but I had this instinct that I didn't want to go further, and you had to pay for the pro to get the AI, and you could even try it free. And I said, should I try it? No, you don't want to change your writing style, and that's what will wind up happening if you do that.
You're afraid that it will affect or change your voice as a writer.
Exactly, and if you Google, and that's sort of the consensus that people say, don't use it. Don't use it for fiction.
It flattens everything out.
But so that's that. Now here the other thing, and 35, 40 years ago, I had a friend who I traveled with on business trips quite often. His name was Joe Cantu. And I'd be walking around with Joe, and he'd see something, and he'd write some notes. And I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm writing a book. And he would just see scenery and write little notes for himself. And so I started talking to him, and I told him, I started saying, yeah, I've been interested in writing, and I never really took it. And he told me something so simple, and I could just hear him saying it. He goes, Mike, just start writing. And that is the words of just start writing. That's what I tell people. Just sit down and start writing. It sounds so simple, but it's so profound. That's what you need to do. And in this day and age too, it's not like you're the guy in the old movies where he's typing it, so it's you can't change it. No, and I always tell people too that I don't like writing. I like editing and rewriting.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you really love it. And so realize what you throw down is not going to be what's going to be, very unlikely that's going to be what's in your printed version. So get something down, start thinking, let your imagination take over if you're writing fiction. And that was the one thing writing this novel. I can't believe how sometimes your imagination just comes up with some wild stuff. And wow, that's really good, but where in the world did that come from? You weren't even thinking of it, and it just kind of gets there. But just get down and start writing. Remember, it's not going to be your final piece, and you'll get to love editing and reshaping words, moving things around. That becomes to me, that's the real love.
So I agree with you wholeheartedly that I am a great proponent of The act of writing is the craft, and the act of editing winds up being the art. And so that I'm a proponent of purge drafts. Get it out quickly, and then craft it quickly, and then tell the story in an artistic way after that. And that's all about editorial and drafts and revisions, and that's what makes it sing.
Yep. My son, when he read my book, he told me three things, on the novel, and I'm rereading it, concentrating on those three things. He said, make your dialogue more realistic. He said, sometimes your dialogue is too simple. Wow, that was a good observation. It's a murder mystery. As much foreshadowing you can put in there, the better. I said, good point. And the third thing he says, create tension. Sometimes things go too easy. So, wow. And I mean, that was really good. And I kind of thought, yeah, you're right. That part went too easy there. I have that discussion with Barry a lot too. When Barry's first version of All You Need is Courage, he's like, Barry, you need some conflict. Everything is just too.
It's all about conflict.
It's all conflict. Conflict makes things interesting, and he really got it. He couldn't take it too far though.
It's actually not that it makes it more interesting, which it does. It's that readers tend not to want to read stuff beyond where the conflict is. They don't want nice. They want to go outside of their own mundane lives or their difficult lives or whatever their lives are like, and they want to live vicariously through these characters, and they want to be able to have some kind of catharsis at the end, and the only way to get there is through conflict.
I think you're right. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm convinced of it.
Now, I got one last thing to say about League of Zone. I didn't think I was going to mention this, but I've just got to, because if it does happen, it'll be pretty amazing. My younger brother, his best friend, when he grew up, is a Hollywood film writer.
Nice.
But I don't want to out who he is, but if you would know the movies that he's co-written, and he's from Bayonne, and he's always wanted to do something about our hometown, and I sent him the book, and he's reading it. So,
well, knock wood.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be amazing.
I always thought that's what I thought about this would be a movie. That's why I thought about a fictionalization. Just that whole blue collar ethic of how important softball was in a working class town. So
well, I wish you well, and that perhaps someday I'll get to see it either in a theater or more likely streaming, which is the way everything is these days. Mike Bodayle, this has been an absolutely delightful time with you today, chatting with you about your writing, your career, your family, and I can't thank you enough for your time, your energy, and for your wisdom in all this.
Wow, I can't thank you enough. I really had a blast, and I hope we can do it again when the novel comes out.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.